What's going on? That's Textbook Sports Squad. It is Friday, September 15th, a feel-good Friday, payday Friday. Weekend is coming up. And of course, for us diehard football fans, what we know about the weekend is that on Saturday, we've got college football. Not the best slate of games, but there is a game in that primetime slot. And there is some comments from a coach who's going to be playing in that primetime slot that he said about the opposing team's coach. So that just makes it a little bit more entertaining and interesting, although the game might actually be a shutout for Colorado's side. We'll talk about that more on this podcast. And let's just get right into it. And of course, as y'all know, that's Textbook. So, Colorado State and Colorado play each other Saturday, September 16th on prime time. It'll be in Boulder. And the head coach for Colorado State, Jay Norvell, he said he sat down with ESPN and he says he doesn't care if they hear it in Boulder. He told them, when I talk to grown-ups, quote, I take my hat off and my glasses off. That's what my mother taught me. Now, this was a jab at Deion Sanders because Deion Sanders, when talking to the media and when coaching on the sideline a lot, he always has his sunglasses on, his Colorado hat. The way I take this is this is the Colorado State coach kind of adding more juice and more fuel for his team to show up for him, to see the type of support that his supporting cast has for him. But it's also the wrong jab you want to take, just because we know the week before Matt Rule was disrespected Deion Sanders. Shedeur took that personal, Colorado took that personal, and they beat down Nebraska. Now you want to repeat history, talk some trash about Deion Sanders. Deion Sanders doesn't reply back, but what he does, and I thought it was such a good tactic for him to use to inspire his team, was he says they done made it personal. It was just going to be a good old game, but they made it personal. And we know how much that team rallies around Deion Sanders and would do just about anything for their coach. Now you want to repeat history from what Nebraska did last time? I don't mind if he says that to inspire his team and if it's inside the locker room and it's not exposed to the media. But when you expose it to the media, that's going to add a lot more fuel to the fire for the opposing team than you think. Now, there's another way to take this too. And it's that there's a lot of coaches and a lot of people in the media that are really tired of hearing about Colorado. Because Colorado is such this interesting story, one of the best stories in sports, to be this team that goes 1-11. Now you hire Deion Sanders. He brings in 80 transfers. They beat TCU on the road. Now they're 2-0. They've got Shedeur Sanders rising up the quarterback rankings. He's looking like an NFL caliber quarterback. You have Travis Hunter. He's playing both ways of the ball. It's such an interesting story that a lot of people get tired of it. And a lot of people get jealous of it just because this is Deion Sanders' first year coaching in the FBS. And they've had this much success. Now, Jay Norvell, when I looked at his coaching record and his coaching history, it was interesting for me to find just how much coaching experience he's had. I mean, he's been coaching since 1986. He's been a wide receivers coach. He's been an offensive line coach, tight ends coach, offensive coordinator, assistant coordinator. He was a wide receivers coach at Texas. And from 2017 to 2021, he was the head coach at Nevada. In those years, as chronologically it follows, he went 3-9, 8-5, 7-6, 7-2, 8-4. In every year except his first, he led his team to a bowl game. He was just hired by Colorado in 2022. Their record that year, they went 3-9. Missed a bowl game. So he's had this long coaching resume. He's been coaching for 5 years. Now this will be his 7th as a head coach. And he hasn't had that type of success Deion has. So a lot of these coaches get jealous. And I think that's ultimately what it boils down to, is the jealousy to see that what Deion Sanders has done, in a short period of time compared to what a lot of these other coaches who have been working more as assistants and as prior head coaches at several other different locations and spots, but they haven't had the success of Deion. And jealousy will get you like that. So last night, the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Minnesota Vikings 34-28. And when you watch the game, the score says that it's a lot closer than what it was. Early in the third quarter, the Philadelphia Eagles took a commanding 27-7 lead. Looks like they were going to walk away with the win, and that's what the play calling showed. They were really conservative. They were playing a lot of prevent defense, doing everything just to keep the game in task and just to chew clock. While on the flip side, Minnesota, they were getting into a rhythm. Now, it may have been because the Eagles were playing prevent defense, and so there was a lot open in the field, and there was a lot open for their play calls in the playbook. But they still let them get into a rhythm, and it got interesting, as the score says. It was 34-28. Minnesota's going for an onside kick. If they convert that, then this is a very real game. The game's still going on. You have yourself a game where Minnesota could steal a game from Philly. Now, that didn't happen, but when you look at the big picture for the Minnesota Vikings, and you look at how the team performed in the second half, you have to feel encouraged by it. And especially against a Philadelphia Eagles defense, which is very good, and the defensive line, which is stacked, one of the most elite defensive lines in the league. And there's a lot of people that are ready or preparing to call the Kirk Cousins tenure in Minnesota done. Maybe he gets dealt to a team like the New York Jets. I think that's too early to call, just because this is only week 2. You're going into week 3. You lost a game you shouldn't have against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Then you're going on to Philadelphia the next week. That's not the way. Of course, you don't want to start your season like that. But when you should have won against Tampa Bay, and then you have to go to play Philadelphia on a short week, the only great possibility or great outcome of that is that you're going to start 0-2 most likely. Now, like I said, you shouldn't have lost to Tampa Bay, but it's also week 1. With week 1, there's teams we thought would have performed good that performed terribly, and teams that we thought were going to be bad that performed fantastic. So who knows, by week 6, we might be talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in a whole different light. And if we're not, then okay. Then you can get inch closer to dealing Kirk Cousins. But you look at the Minnesota Vikings' remaining games. They play against the Chargers. Who knows with the Chargers, just because we know in all possibilities, in all scenarios, the Chargers are going to somehow find a way to lose a game, especially if it's one possession. You can't trust Brandon Staley. You can't. And then the next week they have the Panthers. Should win that game. Then you've got the Chiefs, the Bears, the 49ers, the Packers. So in that span, it looks like you've got tough game, not so tough game, tough game, not so tough game. So this might be a team that's in the middle of the pack. They've got a 500 record. And if you're the general manager and you're thinking about dealing Kirk Cousins, that's a tough decision, especially if the team's 500 and you don't know. There's a very real possibility that this team could make a playoff push, could get into the playoffs, even though they started 0-2. Then there's a possibility that this thing just falls completely off the rails. And of course, the trade deadline, I think, is October 31st. So the game before that is the Packers. On October 29th, the Vikings would play. I don't know. I think if you're dealing Kirk Cousins now, you're really tanking it into this season. But you also owe everything to those guys in the locker room, especially Justin Jefferson. Shout out to him. He's at 24 years old. He's already surpassed the Chicago Bears receiving yards leader. That's impressive. And then you consider that he really hasn't had a dominant other number two like some of these other wide receivers do. Those are my thoughts on the Minnesota Vikings. Now on the flip side, to the Philadelphia Eagles, it's one of the most unimpressive starts of being 0-2. And now maybe the expectations are too high for the Eagles, but when you consider that the roster they have, the expectations got to be that high. And every team that loses the Super Bowl the following year, they come out really rusty. The Cincinnati Bengals started 0-3 last year. They still made the postseason. They still won their division. They, in fact, went to the AFC Championship game. So you can start out rusty and still get to where you want to be, even though if you ask the Cincinnati Bengals and just about everyone else, they would have wanted to go to the Super Bowl and win it, of course. But for the Philadelphia Eagles, they still got all the pieces. I'm still worried about that secondary just because you've got Darius Slay, and I'm not confident in James Bradbury or the supporting cast of corners that they have. The defensive line and offensive line, they look stout once again, and especially DeAndre Swift. The knock on DeAndre Swift, especially when evaluating him through watching film, is he always likes to bounce things outside, and he's never taken the given cutback lanes. His vision is very spotty. That may be because he's with the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line, and he's going up against the Minnesota Vikings defensive line, so it's a lot easier to have vision, especially if the lanes to run through are that huge and you're getting 5-6 yards of being untouched. But even when there wasn't anything, he wasn't bouncing it to the boundary. He was actually at 5'9", putting his head and shoulder down and trying to gain tough yards. Then he had an impressive game. It was 170-some yards rushing, a rushing touchdown. Should have been 3, but the Eagles enforced their most unstoppable play in football. That's the Jalen Hurts sneak. And so those are my thoughts of the game Thursday night. My audience, I appreciate y'all. Let me know in the comment section what you think about the Minnesota Vikings. Should they pack it in and think about dealing Kirk? Type yes or no. And then for the Philadelphia Eagles, is this one of the most unimpressive starts to being 2-0 that you've seen for a team? Let me know in the comments. Appreciate y'all. There's growing buzz that Alabama is looking to make a change at quarterback. Reports, their 247 insider has reported that Tyler Buchner is going to get the start Saturday against USF. And now, was this the change that Alabama needed to make? In my opinion, I don't think any of the quarterbacks that they have on that roster really are going to make a difference. Now, Jalen Milroe, he's a phenomenal athlete. The only thing against him is that he can't pass the ball. He can't read coverages, and it was evident in the Texas game. Ty Simpson, you just don't know yet. Now, Tyler Buchner, he transferred from Notre Dame. The Notre Dame offensive coordinator is now the offensive coordinator at Alabama. So you thought before the season, with how kind of the offseason moves went, that Buckner was going to be the starter. He wasn't. It was Milroe. We saw Milroe's product. Now Buckner is going to be the starter. And if Buckner was second on that depth chart, and this is a QB battle that went all the way into September, I don't know if any quarterback is going to solve Alabama's issues. They have the offensive line. Caden Proctor had a great game, especially for a freshman, going into a primetime game in a game of that magnitude. I just don't know if Alabama has these weapons, because you look at the year before, they had Bryce Young. The protection was below average, and that's troublesome for Bama because they always have NFL caliber offensive linemen. And then the weapons and playmakers, they didn't show up when they needed to. You have Jermaine Burton. He hasn't done much, and I don't see him as much of a threat. They do have Ja'Cory Brooks, and I like Ja'Cory Brooks, but he lacks consistency. He'll have a lot of games where he's making plays and looking like he could emerge as that wide receiver one for them, but he needs more consistency. With the Alabama team in general, that defense is fantastic. It's looking back to the 2015 caliber defense, 2016, that era of defense that Saban has had. They did have some mislaps in the secondary, but in terms of hard nose, you're not going to establish the run against us. That defense was spot on. Now they did get 34 on their head, but that is Texas, and it's Steve Sarkisian, and your offense wasn't moving the ball practically at all. So when your defense is only getting a 5-minute break, you're going to expect them to break. It's not going to be a defense that bends but doesn't break. So, all my audience, listeners, is this the right move that Alabama needs to make? And if Buckner is the right guy, what does he need to do? I'm not saying he has to go above and beyond, but what does he need to do to just keep this Alabama team afloat and that offense steady? Let me know in the comments. I appreciate your support and all of your comments. That's the end of the first quarter of this podcast. If you haven't already, go to my YouTube channel at ThatsTextbookSports, my Spotify account at ThatsTextbookSports, TikTok account at ThatsTextbookSports, and my Twitter account or X at textbook_sports. Give me a follow, like this video, subscribe. You don't want to miss any content I have coming up. In last night's Minnesota Vikings versus Philadelphia Eagles football game, the Vikings had the ball before half ended. I believe it was like 23 seconds. Cousins throws a pass to Jefferson. Jefferson's at the goal line. He's looking to reach out the ball, but just before it breaks the pylon, he fumbles the ball. It goes out of bounds. And with the NFL rule, it states that if a player loses the ball and it goes out through the end zone, that's a touchback. So Minnesota lost possession. It was deemed a touchback. Eagles got the ball, were able to kneel, go into half. Or I believe they got a field goal out of that. They did. They got a field goal out of that. And so it was like 13-7 at half. Now, a lot of people on social media, this was going crazy, especially Twitter. It was called the dumbest rule in football, the worst rule in football, strikes again, worst rule in sports. Now, if this is the worst rule in football, what do we need to do to change it? What should be the penalty for a player losing the ball that goes through the end zone? Because if a player loses the ball and it goes out of bounds, the ball spot gets marked to where he lost the ball, lost possession. So what should be implemented? I'm curious to what you all think in the chat or in the comment section. Let me know. Should the rule stay as follows? If you lose it through If you lose the ball and it goes out of bounds or through the back of the end zone, should where the player lost the ball at be where the ball gets marked? Because in my opinion, listen, it's a terrible rule. It's one of those rules that doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it strikes really hard and it leaves a mark. You hate it. But in my opinion, the offense has to be penalized something for losing the ball. If a player decides to reach out and they lose that ball before it touches the pylon or breaks the end zone and it goes through the end zone, there has to be a sufficient enough penalty for that. And a lot of coaches will say, if you think you're right and you're going to reach that for that pylon, you better be right. So I'm curious to know what you all think. What should be the rule implemented if this is the worst rule in sports? What should be the penalty for an offensive player fumbling a ball through the end zone? Halftime of this podcast, if you haven't already, go to my YouTube, Spotify, and TikTok account at ThatsTextbookSports and follow me there. And go to my Twitter account at textbook_sports and give me a follow there. Like this video, hit subscribe, be a friend, tell a friend. You don't want to miss any content I have coming up. On this podcast, I'll be introducing a new segment where I'll talk about the team that loses the week or loses in week 2 or 3, whatever, where the wheels start to really come off and this thing goes south. Then I'll also be talking about after the week's over, the team that wins, but you don't really feel good about the win, especially with how the team played. And then the team that loses, but you feel good considering who they went up against and how the team did play. So this week, for this team, if they lose in week 2, the wheels start to really go off this thing. And this is one of the most hyped up teams in the offseason. It's the Chicago Bears going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They have to go in Tampa. Bears have all sorts of questions on that offensive line. A lot of the local and national media have been really on the coaching staff. It seemed like the coaching staff didn't have a game plan. And when you hear the interviews and the post-game conference interviews, you don't know where to go just because this looks like a team that's lost, that has no real coach in the building, no one to rally the troops. And then what you consider with the Chicago Bears, they were one of the most hyped teams. DJ Moore wasn't getting targets. If that continues in week 2, if Justin Fields continues to struggle in week 2, if the offense and defensive line continue to struggle in week 2 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a team we suspect to be picking in the top 10, the things really start to come off the wheels for this thing, and this team goes south. And you're starting to look at, well, at least we have 2 first-round draft picks. Hopefully they're in the top 10, and hopefully one of them is in the top 3 so we can get Caleb Williams. And then if we're lucky enough, we can go get Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, I'll say this about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They might be better than we thought they were. Considering that defensive line, Baker Mayfield, he didn't play fantastic, but he did just enough for the team to win against a team that was in the playoffs last year. The defensive line is fantastic. The offensive line is solid. It's not great or where it once was, especially when they had Brady for his first year. But it's good enough. I mean, Tristan Wirfs, they've got some pieces. So Tampa Bay may be a lot better than we expected them to be. Now, there was some other qualifying candidates, like Denver, if they were to lose to Washington, even though Russell Wilson looked good. And in the first half, he only had one incompletion that was real or true. The other incompletion was just a spike because he had to spike the ball. But if Denver loses versus Washington, you get more questions about Russell Wilson. You get more questions about Sean Payton and what he's done in the offseason and what he's said. So if that happens, you start to see this team start to go south. But I think if Denver loses week 5 against the New York Jets, considering what Sean Payton said about Nathaniel Hackett And then now the Jets don't have Aaron Rodgers. They're having to go with Zach Wilson. So if Denver loses that game, that's when things start to get ugly and escalate. And then lastly for this segment, I'll be talking about the team. If they were to win, boy, are we talking about them in a totally different light. That is the Los Angeles Rams. Went in Seattle and just dominated the Seahawks on both ends of the ball. They've got San Francisco this week. We saw how good San Francisco looked against the Steelers. Now, granted, it may have been the Steelers. They were the preseason champions. We all know we should not put that much stock into preseason. But if the LA Rams beat the San Francisco 49ers, we're talking about them in a whole completely different light. Now, they're not a team that's going to be in that Caleb Williams race, but they're a team that's like, okay, we can do some things with this. Third quarter of this podcast. If you haven't already, go to my YouTube, Spotify, and TikTok account. Go on your phone, type in @ThatsTextbookSports, hit that follow button, and then when you're done with that, you want to go over to your Twitter or X app and type in @textbook_sports, hit the profile, click follow. You don't want to miss any content I have. Kyle McCord has been named the starting quarterback at Ohio State by head coach Ryan Day. Tomorrow, the Buckeyes play against Western Kentucky. So for all my listeners out there and my Buckeye fans out there, what does Kyle McCord have to do against Western Kentucky to make you feel confident that he can go next week against Notre Dame, in Notre Dame, and beat them? Does he have to throw for 300 yards, toss for 3 touchdowns, or are you looking at things a little bit differently than the stats? Are you looking at his comfortability in the pocket? He's getting to his drop back and already he's making his read. He's going through progressions, making his read. What does he have to do for you to feel confident in him? For myself, it's obviously, you would love to see the stats, but you also want to see him feel comfortable in operating that offense. You also want to see that offensive line and run game be able to establish enough, get 3-4 yards to where the whole playbook is open and now you're ahead of the chains. Now Kyle McCord doesn't feel like he has to be Superman on 3rd and long. That's what you want to do. That's what I'm going to be looking for. Kyle McCord against Western Kentucky. So how does Zach Wilson and the New York Jets withstand this fearsome Cowboys pass rush? A lot of people, including myself, expect the Dallas Cowboys to absolutely manhandle the Jets offensive line and for that defense to just have another fantastic day. They might not put up 30 points in fantasy like they did in week 1 against the Giants, but they might put 27-28. But how do they handle that? I think this is going to be a strong defensive battle. You look at we all know about the Cowboys defense, but the New York Jets defense is no slouch either. They had one of the most outstanding performances of all defenses in week 1, right there with Dallas. And we didn't really get to see much from that Dallas Cowboys offense because the defense and special teams already had a lead where at the end of the first quarter, Dallas knew they were going to walk away with that win, so we didn't see much from the offense, or especially CD. Did they look comfortable? Yeah, of course they looked comfortable because they already had a sustainable enough lead. But it's going to be really interesting to see how that Cowboys offense handles the Jets defense. Because if this Cowboys offense handles that Jets defense, I think this is going to be a team that's definitely top 2 in the NFC. But to answer the question of how the New York Jets can withstand the Cowboys defense, a lot of shoulders is once again going to have to be placed on that defense, getting them the ball continually, and for that defense to out-tire the Cowboys defense. And what I mean by that is, yeah, the New York Jets offense is going to be facing a lot of 3 and outs, but that New York Jets defense has also got to know, okay, if we just do what we did last week, keep it sustainable, 3 and out, bend, don't break, only allow 3, that's a win. So can they do that enough where Dallas is also getting tired as well. That'll be an interesting thing to see. I'm going to look forward to that. Unlike others who think this game's over, I'm going to be watching, though. Of course, we all love football, and if we're diehard football fans, we'll watch any game, regardless if that team might blow out the other. But it'll be really interesting to see these two heavyweight defenses go toe-to-toe. So for the Jets offense and Zach Wilson, you got to go with a heavy dose of the run. Breece Hall had a fantastic week. You have to utilize him. Do a lot of motions to confuse that defense, but also realize Zach Wilson, he should not have to be the guy. You might want to take a couple shots here and then, especially if you're establishing the run enough. But you want to make sure Zach Wilson doesn't have to be that guy. That's the end of the third quarter for this podcast. If you haven't already, go to YouTube, Spotify, TikTok, open the app, type on the search bar, @ThatsTextbookSports, click on the profile, hit follow, like this video, make sure you subscribe. Then when you're done with that, you're going to want to go over to Twitter or X, open the app, click on the search bar, type in @textbook_sports, click the profile, hit follow. Don't want to miss any content I have. My last segment before I wrap this podcast up is going to be talking about the NBA and my MVP candidates. Starting off, I'm going to go with De'Aaron Fox. Had a fantastic year last year. Really rose to stardom and cemented himself as one of the top guards in the league. You look at it in that Mike Brown system that they had, he really thrived. Then you consider his clutch points and how he was, I think, number one by a wide margin in NBA history with clutch points in the final 2 minutes or something like that. So I've got De'Aaron Fox right there. I think another year for him to be able to learn, another year for him to be able to get the know the NBA. I think he's approaching year 7. I think he's finally gelled into the type of player we saw him to be when he was in Kentucky. And then, lastly, but definitely and certainly not least, Anthony Edwards. It feels like ever since D'Angelo Russell was traded to the Lakers, Anthony Edwards has had full control of this offense, full control of this team. He's really rose to be, once again, like De'Aaron Fox, one of the top young guards in the league. Plays both sides of the ball really well. Not a great or lockdown defender, but he's a good enough defender, and he's a really solid two-way player. Then offensively, just can score from anywhere on the court. 3-point, 3-level scorer. Those are the two players that I have and see that can win the MVP this upcoming season. That wraps up this podcast. I appreciate my audience. Appreciate every one of y'all tuning in. Once again, go ahead, follow me on social media, my Spotify, YouTube, TikTok account, @ThatsTextbookSports. Then you want to go on over to my Twitter account, follow me @textbook_sports. You don't want to miss any content I have. Like this video, be a friend, tell a friend, share this video to others, subscribe. Appreciate every one of y'all. Let me know what you think. Who's going to be the NBA MVP this season? Who do you have? Is it D-Fox? Is it Ant? Is it someone else? I appreciate every one of y'all. As I said once again, take care. Have a fantastic day. Every day is a new day. God bless. And until next time,